Somebody like to move adoption? Seconder? All in favor? Carried. You've got the minutes of the March 27th meeting. Somebody, seconder? Any errors or omissions? No? All in favor? Carried. We don't have any bylaws. Delegations. Sergeant Bates, the floor is yours.
Oh, everybody can hear me though, right? Okay. So basically the province has passed the burning smoke control regulations, which refers to burning land clearing debris. It's not your backyard burning of leaves and stuff like that. It's just for land clearing debris, so logs and stumps. Part of that is they changed it from, this came into 2019 and they changed it from the original one in that they created what they call sensitivity zones. So areas where there's lots of people is a high sensitivity zone, then just outside is medium, and then the remote areas are low. And what you can and cannot do in those areas changes significantly. So high sensitivity zone would be Vanderhoof all the way along Highway 16 to past Fraser Lake, then the area around Fort St. James. So if you're in a high sensitivity zone, you can only burn for 1 day. That's the big one. And the venting has to be good. So if you read through the regs, there's lots of information there. So we did, how should we say, educate some local people about these regulations. And since we met, things have dramatically improved. I did do a meeting with the Cattlemen's Association, explained to them too. So I'm hoping things have improved for the better, and we'll hope this is longer term. But yeah, it is a $230 fine right off the hop. And if repeat offender, then we'd be taking them to court. So if anybody has any questions, I am open to them.
So mine would be that follow-up to that. When you say we're in a high, Vanderhoof corridors in a high sensitive zone, so it would only be in that corridor. But if we get outside of the ag belt,
yep.
So down Sturgeon Point, we had individuals last week that started piles on Wednesday night. And you and I think we all understand that's not a cured pile. That's a wet pile from winter. Right?
Yeah, and then part of the regulations are it has to be a cured pile.
Yeah.
Be 4 months, or 30% less moisture content, which I'm not sure where they put that regulations because when I show up, it's on fire. Not going to be testing. Not going to be testing the moisture content. But if nobody calls me, I wouldn't be aware of that. We do
Okay.
like I do loops around usually.
Yeah.
In the morning when we first started, I started checking out every morning to see if I could see any piles.
Yeah.
If I didn't see them, but the Sturgeon Point, unless they're way out on Sturgeon Point, they're still going to be in the high sensitivity zone.
Okay.
Right.
Well, that's good to know. It's just, I think when, it's an education thing. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it and see 1 day, the venting's good and it's 1 day burning, I'm going to burn.
Yeah.
But we've got to be able to educate people that yes, you can burn, but that doesn't mean you should burn, because these piles, in this case, you're just coming in out of April, they've been full of snow. And so that 1 day of burning turns into 2 or 3 days of smudging.
Yes.
So then the pile just putters, or, the smoke just putters away and doesn't get out and then sits in the valley, right?
Yep.
Comes back to the valley. And that's the problem. And just, having the purple air monitors have been great. I mean, they're not as accurate as the ones on top of on our municipal buildings, but it's interesting to watch because as soon as you can see it, that rate goes sky high immediately. So if we will look at that and start a better education program of when to burn and how to burn, I think that goes a long ways.
It is, and a lot of people did this misconception, particularly in winter, that it's a clear blue sky, it's a good day to burn. And there's a situation, it's called thermal inversion. And it's the smoke goes up, and we've all seen it, and it goes up about 100 meters and just flattens out and goes across the horizon. And that would be a poor venting day. And we did have a case of that, so. And when we showed the person a photo, they're like, oh, because here's this smoke going like 3 kilometers across the horizon, so. Yeah, and as I talked to the mayor, places such as yourself, you guys can pass your own bylaws if you so choose. I came from Vancouver Island, where some of the regional districts have their own burning bylaws. And the only catch is they have to be more restrictive than the provincial ones. That's the only catch. They can't be less restrictive. So for example, right now, if you were to burn high, medium, or low, you have to be 500 meters away from a residence. If the municipality want to pass around saying it's 1,000 meters, then it's fine, but they can't make it 250. And there are exemptions to the 500 meters to where you can do as little as 100 meters. But if you read through the regulations, it's section 13, and they have to comply with all of the things of section 13. So it has to be 4 months. It has to be recorded that it's been seasoned for 4 months. It has to be, you have to notify all your neighbors. It has to be a good day. You have to notify everybody in the area. So there's a lot of caveats to that one. And one of the things is, as you mentioned, somebody mentioned earlier, is you can use air curtain burners too. And that changes things too. But from my knowledge around here, there's not a lot of air curtain burners to be had. So.
Sure, I'm on. Yeah, just a question, because there's one of the things that talks about in the regulations is to try to educate people to not to burn, to use other methods. I'm
Yep.
just wondering, are you seeing any individuals take advantage of, chipping or, even burying or something like that?
One of the uses with chipping is very expensive. And one of the things they did change in the regs is that you can haul the material. It used to be you had to burn on the property it came from, but under the new regs, you can haul it 5 kilometers away to burn it somewhere else. The problem is 5 kilometers from here wouldn't get you past the airport. Right. So it wouldn't get you over the hill into the next valley. That's part of the problem. Our biggest thing with educating the people that we've told them is they really need to learn how to pile the piles.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Too many often they're windrows, they're piled with a bulldozer.
Yeah.
It's full of dirt. It's gonna burn
Yeah.
for weeks.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the biggest lesson that I talked to the Cattlemen's Association, right? Pile it, get rid of the dirt, make sure it's good and dry, and it'll go off. I've seen piles done right. Now, they did a test on Vancouver Island years ago that I was part of, and they piled them properly, and by the time the guy finished lighting the 24th pile, the first one was gone.
Yeah.
Right? So piled right is great.
Yeah, and the thing around here, if you are clearing the land for agriculture, you don't want to burn all your topsoil anyway and sterilize it, right? That's,
Yeah.
little as it is. Good. I'm glad you came in. I just, I thought it would be good when we talked in the
Mhm.
fall to come in, do a bit of an education piece. I mean, the regs are pretty self-explanatory if a person goes there and checks them out. It really seems that it's in the fall, we have a problem largely coming from the agricultural area outside.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've lit a lot of piles in my time when I was a farmer in a past life, and it's learning how to do it right and learning, in 2023, how we need to take care of things.
So 30 years ago, the fire department would have told you to put a tire in it to get it going, but not. That's a no-go.
No. But no, but it is definitely, I think, Vanderhoof has consistently been in the worst 3 air sheds in British Columbia, and that's something that we want to change.
That's just that valley thing. So yeah.
It is, right? But we need to be aware of that valley and take the precautions we need to do to keep people safe.
Yeah, and you guys all live here. If your neighbor calls you, because I'm sure you guys get calls like I do.
Yeah.
Call the rap line, right? It's
Yeah.
the same as for calling for a bear in your yard.
Yeah.
Right? And then we can
Awesome.
deal with it.
We will get that message out. Thank you
Awesome.
so much for coming
All
in.
right, thanks.
Awesome. So now we'll move on to the PGTSA apportionment process. Laurie, Andrew, and Anthony, come on up.
Thanks a lot for inviting us here today to speak about the apportionment process for the Prince George Timber Supply Area. I'm Laurie Borth, Regional Executive Director for the Ministry of Forests in the Almanica region and reside here in Vanderhoof. And with me are my colleagues, Anthony Giannatti. He's our Director of Tenures and Pricing for the North Area and Ministry of Forests, and Andrew Tate, who is our tenures team lead for the North Area Ministry of Forests. So what we'd like to do is go through the presentation and welcome any questions through the way. And I had sent a letter, I guess it was a couple months ago, about the process and asking for feedback. And then you invited me and our group here to present and explain the process and answer any questions you may have before submitting your feedback. So does that work? Okay, so. Oh, okay, yeah, and so. And maybe I'll just do a bit of an entry here and then get the technical people up here. But so the chief forester set the timbers, like the allowable annual cut for the Prince George timber supply area. And so we're going through another reduction in the cut as per what the chief forester set. And so this process is about the apportionment. So how do we apportion it? How do we make the decision to apportion the timber supply? And I know we've gone through an accelerated cut over the past while in Vanderhoof for the past several years. So we've had, extra shifts at mills. We've had a flurry of activities in the forest industry, and it will remain important to this area, forest industry, but it will be transitioning somewhat because of the mountain pine beetle and also because of large fires and that. So maybe we'll just go right into the presentation. You want to?
Sure. Right. Thanks. So we've got a bit of a presentation here. We'll roll through it. If there's any questions at any point in time, please, just stop us and we'll see what we can do. There's a lot of acronyms in here, so if I roll through an acronym pretty quick, just stop as well. And yeah, and I'll try and explain that as well. So if we could get the next. Oh, I don't know who's driving. I'm sorry. Right on. Okay, while we're waiting for it to load. So, yeah, that's perfect. So Lori kind of, didn't really steal the thunder, I think, but it, started out with a message here that I think we're all kind of fairly familiar with. So the PGTSA, so it's an administrative boundary here that covers 2 forest districts. So we got the Stewart Nechako Forest District here that I think everybody is familiar with, the 2 offices, Vanderhoof, Fort St. James, Prince George. So it's the largest TSA in the province, which in a way is a bit of a good thing. It has the ability, I think, to kind of buffer our industry a little bit, but really we're at a point in time now where we've gone through mountain pine beetle uplifts and we're in a decline, right? So our AACs are declining, and at some point, probably in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to be at a bit of a steady state before our forests sort of come back in line and the AACs come back. So the allowable annual cut, is everybody kind of familiar with that? It's how much we're allowed to harvest over a given point in time for a year. Okay, so in terms of the PGTSA, so we were here, a couple of years ago, kind of talking, largely about the same story, right? So a series of reductions that we've had to go through. Our last major AAC reduction, we went from 12.5 million down to 8.35. So about a 30% reduction, so pretty significant. We've just gone through another reduction again. It's another 1 million cubic meters off of our AAC. And we're looking about a 12% reduction again. The forecast, for the next 10 years, probably about another 1 million cubic meters or so, depending on sort of the outcome of our land use planning processes. During this time, the government has spent a significant time, I think, kind of, trying to figure out what the future is going to look for us. And probably 2 pieces that I'll mention here. One is reconciliation with First Nations. And in this context, as we go through sort of declining AACs, it's important for us to sort of consider how we're going to work through that process with nations. Government's got what I kind of call a reconciliation imperative, to work with nations in collaboration and cooperation through this process. In part, managing the stewardship values that I think we all know and understand. So maybe we'll flip to the next slide. So while that's loading up, so this is just a bit of a visual, folks, that like some graphs and numbers in here. But when we look back to 1996, which was kind of like the first modern AAC decision, we were sitting at about 9.3 million cubic meters. In a perfect world, we would have stayed at 9.3 million for, probably 40 years, right? But sort of the diversity of the big TSA, mountain pine beetle came through. And in order for us to sort of capitalize on that value, to the people of BC, local communities, the AAC was increased and we were able to sort of, salvage that wood before we lost value. As you can kind of see, we've been on a pretty downward trend. So 2017 was like I say, the drop from 12 million to 8.3. We've just gone down sort of that last little bit of a step there. And so we're at 7.35 for the next 5 years or so before the next determination starts. So that's kind of the AAC background. So what we're kind of here to talk about now is apportionment. So we can flip to the next slide. So, we've got this big bucket of volume essentially. So 7.35 million cubic meters of AAC. And it'll slowly show up. We've got a great graphic on there, trust me. There it goes. Okay, so a few different numbers here. So really what we like to kind of describe the AAC is as a bit of a pie, right? And in this case, the pie is shrinking, right? So somebody's eating away at the crust. Apportionment is really government's vision for who's going to get what slice of the pie. In times of uplift, for example, so when we added AAC in there, the tenure was a currency and everybody was getting an opportunity to go out and harvest. So we created a lot of short-term licenses to capture on that volume opportunity. As we manage kind of down through the AAC, those licenses have expired and we're now in a point in time where our total commitments, so the total AAC that we have inside of our tenure system exceeds the AAC that we have. So we have to manage down basically. The last decision that we just went through, we're basically, go from sort of that yellow circle into the blue circle, right? So we've shrunk down. Really what we looked at, how we're going to manage down is kind of looking at government's current commitments. So looking at kind of what our normal sort of, long-term commitments are, and we kind of divided that into two buckets. So a bucket, one would be the replaceable forest licenses. So those are the major tenures that forest licensees like Canfor, West Fraser, Apollo, Sinclair, Hampton, those folks all manage those long-term replaceable tenures. The other bucket that I'll call the second bucket, I'll call it BC's bucket. So it's the volume that the province essentially manages. And through that bucket, we service categories like the BC timber sales, for example, and some of our other, non-replaceable forest licenses, Forest Service Reserve, a couple small other pieces. So the last decision, basically, we took those two buckets, and in order to match our commitments to our AAC, we had to take 20% off of both of those buckets. So that was kind of our starting place. So the replaceables were reduced by 20, and BC's bucket was reduced by 20. From there, then BC's bucket, we went through the apportionment process and basically allocated volume. So through that process, that apportionment process, we allocated volume to BC timber sales. So they typically are set at 20% of the AAC. It's kind of a government objective. And then from there, we were able to provide First Nations a substantial component of BC's volume. So, why do we look at that, sort of opportunity in that way? It kind of comes back to the opening around our reconciliation objectives with nations and trying to encourage their participation in the forest sector in a way that starts to, provide some of the economic opportunity of the forest and the land base. Okay, so if we flip to the next one. So what you'll see here shortly is a chart, and we kind of call this our apportionment table. So as I sort of spoke to, the pie and the slices, these are essentially the slices of the pie. So this is the outcome of the last apportionment decision. So Minister apportioned the replaceable forest licenses, so they received a 20% reduction. And then essentially the sum of the rest is, what was remaining, and that category, it was also reduced. So an allocation was made to the non-replaceable forest licenses. So that's to service our commitments there. 1.2 million to BC, to First Nation woodland licenses, 1.6 to BC timber sales, and then the Forest Service Reserve. So this chart essentially, if you were curious, you could Google apportionment. You should be able to get onto the Ministry of Forest website, and from there you can sort of see, essentially the current commitments across the province. But you can, zoom into the PGTSA. Okay, so we'll roll to the next slide. So what I wanted to do was just kind of recap, from a summary of sort of the 2021 apportionment process and the interest that Vanderhoof provided to the minister. So I think you'll see at sort of the end of this, our interest here is really to, ask that question again. What is the interest in terms of, the local government here and your constituents in terms of how you would see the apportionment playing out. So just kind of got them highlighted here and just, a quick refresher. So forest sector jobs, continuity of fiber flow to local communities, recognizing the relationships with the nations, maintaining replaceable forest license holders. And, essentially the ministry shared this vision with the minister sort of during that process. Okay, so if we'll hop over to the next slide here. Okay, so we basically took all the interest from the First Nations, local governments, stakeholders like truck loggers, harvesting contractors, and put that in front of the minister. So I kind of went through the outcome of the decision, but I think it's important to just kind of take a quick look back at the outcome of the decision rationale that the minister made. And I guess in a way to sort of think about whether or not, these interests, still resonate with you guys and think about, how you might position your interests kind of, going forward. So, we had an interest in, contributing to First Nations resolution of title through operating conditions. I guess really what we're, thinking about here is just, creating sort of the conditions on the land base where the licensees have the ability, timely access to harvesting and cutting permits, for example. Partnerships with nations that facilitate, contractors, minimize disruptions to employment and milling facilities. Also thinking about, how the reductions would be applied and the provincial interest around maintaining fiber continuity. And, I think a bit of a key piece here, the outcome that we look as one of the, I think, key measures here is just sort of the level of reconciliation, that the province was able to provide to a lot of the local First Nations here. And, when we look, I think today, sort of, about a year later, I think that we all sort of see the benefits that's providing to the nations. They have agreements with a lot of the local milling facilities and logging contractors. Okay, so we can roll over to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to pass this over to Andrew.
So what we're here for is sort of to reach out, as Anthony said and Lori, to start that engagement process with communities, the stakeholders, the First Nations, and the licensees to sort of get your vision of what an apportionment might look like for the Prince George timber supply area. So putting that 7.35 million into the buckets of the volume. So like the 60% replaceables, 20% First Nations, 20% BCTS. Does it stay the same, just a reduction of 12%, or does it need moved around to meet other objectives? So we started off with the engagement letter back starting in March from Lori, saying we'll be working all summer, reaching out, doing one-on-one meetings, just taking calls, emails, whatever for questions. We had initial kickoff with the licensees in Prince George in person and video conference on March 14th, sort of to give the same message out that you guys are getting here. A little more technical in the slides, but basically the same message. And what we're looking for is sort of, how do you see us moving forward? this is just the initial presentation of the information. We can further follow up with additional meetings, calls, letters, whatever. So feel free to reach out to myself, Anthony, or Lori at any time. We'll get back to you on that. So we're looking for sort of two decisions moving forward. There'll be a section 63 under the Forest Act, where that's the license reduction, where we reduce the licenses down to match that new AAC set. And from that, we'll apportion the volumes out. And the decision comes around to is there may be some extra volume that's been freed up through the reductions or through expiry of licenses, maybe moving some of the categories. So how do we align those with meeting interests for the communities and licensees as well? So next slide. This one just basically summarizes the last one, what we're seeking for. This one can be actually clipped and shared out, posted on your website. Anthony's contact information is there for email correspondence back, because I didn't want my email flooded. But yeah, I can leave. Dave knows how to get a hold of me. You can email Lori, myself, or anybody on the North Area Tenures team with any comments. So we're looking for feedback, preferably up until the end of May. We're looking at trying to get everything in line for sort of a early fall decision piece. And that's, I'll just leave it. That's the last slide. The rest is just for questions or comments for anyone.
Perfect. Questions, comments? Councilor Vandola.
Got a few questions, guys. Really worried about us being able to even achieve this 7.35 million. Since 2015, when the original data package came out, we didn't have a whole bunch of big fires in the area. We were just kind of starting to get into the thick of the spruce beetle epidemic. Our fuel prices have jacked to where our operability limits into the top end of supply block B, the bottom end of D here, that I'm thinking that the available volume is probably going to shrink even more than that 7.35. I'm just wondering, how are we going to reconcile that? And as well, we have a new old growth objective coming. Is that volume from that strategy going to take away from the Crown Forest managed land base? So we need to, so if you start adding, start compounding those on, all of a sudden, I think we're down to 6.5 million, and so now we're going to be overcommitted in the TSA. And I'm just wondering how we'll reconcile that. And I don't know if Kelly's been working on a new data package or not, and he's a guy that just knows how to do all that stuff, and just whether that's something that we're putting our minds to.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I was going to say something about a previous district manager, but you got a great group here, pretty well informed. Really good observation, Dave. I think, from our perspective, timely decisions are really important, right? To make sure that we're not, in a position where we're essentially over harvesting. That's really what we're trying to do here, right? Is how do we try and match, our harvest levels with our AAC? So our first piece is really kind of getting to this new AAC. So that's the first step. In terms of sort of the difference between, the fiber supply or the fiber availability versus the AAC, the ministry is, along with kind of our sister ministry, I guess, Water Land Resource Stewardship, working towards, kind of updated land use planning, a modernized land use planning, essentially. And, I think some people may be familiar with the Environmental Stewardship Initiative that's been happening sort of in the Stewart and Ochako district with the Carrier-Sekene First Nation. And so through that process, they've identified, a series of, I guess, sort of values on the land base that we're currently, managing towards. And, that sort of had the effect of, I guess, getting licensees and sort of ministry to think a little bit different about, what our long-term AAC is looking at, sort of managing the, the cumulative effects in a more sort of integrated and holistic way. So the next AAC decision, you know, we're probably, well, we're kind of, you know, in October, we'll be about 4 years out, but, you know, through this process, through this kind of modernized land use planning process, you know, with the First Nations, we'll start to integrate, you know, those different land use objectives into sort of the new AAC. So we're going to be in a bit of a continual process for a while here, of, you know, kind of getting towards sort of that midterm level. You know, I think ideally we'd like to, you know, be there at the next decision. But it'll just sort of depend, you know, what that AAC is and how, you know, government wants to manage down to that level. So.
But, are we looking to, like, when we rolled out the last apportionment decision, we, as a ministry, we provided a bunch of options. Are we gonna go through the same sort of process, or are we gonna stick with just you know, each licensees will maintain the 56% of the cut, and BCTS will get their 20, and First Nation Woodland Alliances will get their 15, you know,
Yeah.
and such and such. And or are we going to offer different scenarios based on new objectives going forward?
Yeah.
Because you know, it'd be important to see which, you know, if there was a bunch of options, which, you know, which we may, as a municipality, agree to one over another and whatnot.
Yeah, so a couple things there. I think to start with, you know, if the municipality's in a position to be able to, you know, provide a perspective on the apportionment, that's probably the best starting place, right? So, you know, if there's a particular interest, you know, identifying that and sort of how you see that being, you know, carried out through the apportionment decision. So that's a good starting place. Where I think we are trending right now is, you know, looking at the previous work that we've completed through the last apportionment decision. You know, government spent a lot of time with nations, as well as the industry working through, you know, the previous decision. You know, ideally, we'd like to have these decisions done inside of 6 months. You know, it took us a bit longer than that to kind of, you know, get through, you know, a shared understanding in terms of, you know, what we can and can't do inside of the apportionment decision. The way we're kind of positioning this one now, I think that the licensees sort of understand, you know, this piece is what we're basically saying is like, look, we've laid the tracks, you know, largely for the last decision. So let's look at how we went through the last decision and see if that isn't kind of, you know, essentially our neutral starting point for this decision. And that last decision, you know, kind of, you know, looked at sort of the amount of volume that replaceable license holders have held over time, and then kept them at the same percentage through the declines. So that's sort of a bit of a principled basis. So, you know, on a go forward basis, I think that's where we'll start again, is, you know, kind of maintaining the relative shares through the reduction, and then look and sort of see where that gets us going forward. But, you know, in terms of, you know, the allocation, it's really about, you know, sort of managing, you know, the commitments. There are some, you know, kind of technical rules around what we can and can't do, but, you know, I think, you know, providing an opportunity, you know, for the, you know, for input essentially across all of the shareholders, or sorry, stakeholders.
Yeah, and we'll go to council question. Okay, sir.
Yeah, thanks for coming, you guys. It's difficult at best, I'm sure, to come and try to explain this when there are so many other initiatives going on in the province and you're trying to tell us what apportionment is. And so we've got the old growth strategy and 14 recommendations, and you might secure 2.6 or 3.1 million hectares. Most of that's in the interior, not on the island. You've got a watershed security strategy. You've got the ESI process, which I think is a good process. I like that. The values are being built from the bottom up instead of always a timber focus. And then there's this brand new thing that's being rolled out by not you three, but by your ministry, that is this biodiversity and ecosystem health framework, which is going to look at surrounding those ecosystems and protecting ecosystems now. So here we go, we've saved nice big trees somewhere, but now we're going to protect the whole ecosystem around it. So I share the same concerns as Councillor Vandola, is that here we are talking about what this is going to be when we know with what's in front of us that it's probably going to be a lot, worse is the wrong word, but it'll be a lot worse than we think it is. And so local government engagements, where I'm trying to get to here is that, you know, when the beetle epidemic went ramping up, this council stood up and said, you need to slow the AAC down. But that was a policy of the government of the day. Ramp it up, jobs, give the timber away for 2 bits, whatever we did. We thought we knew what was best, but nobody listened to us back in the day. And we didn't cut it down because those decisions aren't being made by you three. Those are decisions that are being made for fights and seats across the province that, you know, we need to win this. And that's where I think foresty's degraded to in the province. And I'm cutting a wide swath, but it was part of my life for 40 years. And my issue is that if you're going to engage local government, you've created all of these towns in rural British Columbia. Not you, governments have. And yet we don't have any input to what's going on the land base that built our towns. We don't. But we're going to go, and I think it's the right process. You're going through reconciliation, but that's in a silo with nations. And local governments have been asking to be involved and make decisions. And I could probably come up with 0 that we've made an impact on where that decision was actually implemented on the land base. So you've really got to do a really good job with local government. Tonight's a great start. But there's so many processes that are being rammed down our throat. We haven't even gone to an old growth meeting yet. And then the government jams out this biodiversity and eco. Here's another virtual session. We're spinning our head. We don't know what's going on. I'm hoping that the government does, because I think it affects our town. And so when we have to make decisions for our community, we want people to not only listen, but to act, because we're really trying hard to figure this out. I think hopefully better than most, we have a pretty good idea of what's on the land base. So, you know, so I'm concerned about that. But please, when you get out to these local governments, really take their engagement as something of, okay, I heard what they said, you know, let's go to a smaller top, lower stump, whatever it may be. I don't know. But don't go and say, well, we talked to local governments and that's a tick box, because that's how we feel. So I applaud you for being here tonight, and I can't argue processes, but local government engagement is so crucial to our communities, and we just need you to listen. You know, we'll provide some response, but we'd love to see something that said, geez, Banner who said 2-inch top, and we're going to go to 2-inch top across the province. That it would mean that you've listened to us, but we haven't seen that totally. So, and I don't know if that's fair or unfair, Lori or Andrew. But it's just too much coming at once. And if we're struggling, the other communities in our area, the nations, have got to be struggling at capacity. But yet this is all being done, like the Premier said, we're getting all 14 recommendations done by the end of the year. And Shane tells us he's got to get it done. And it's like, really? Like, how are you going to do that? And so it's difficult, but we'll provide some good feedback, I think, because, you know, I think we know the land base pretty good. So anyway, it's more of an event, but please listen to local governments. And the processes are the processes. But local government engagement means a lot to the towns that policies have created across BC. And so that's where I would hope you'd.
Well said, Councillor Farrell. Any other questions or comments? Rants? Councillor Vandola, did you have
You know what, the only thing that we didn't see on the last apportionment table under the CFA category, it was a 0. And I know for communities like Vanderhoof, Fort St. James, Fraser Lake, especially with the potential mill closures that we're seeing, we need to see some of that volume stay in the communities. And, you know, even if we bolstered the First Nation category to where potentially there could be partnerships or something like that, you know, that'd be something. And the other piece is I was happy to see on there, you know, I'm hoping to continue to see is the FSR, because we have so many local contractors that really require some of those little volumes to maintain their households. And and of course, Stuart and Chaco is one of the biggest champions of utilizing the Forest Service Reserve through forestry license to cuts and salvage logging. So, you know, for us, we'd like to make sure those are still maintained in the apportionment decision.
Great.
Great.
Before I just finish up, sort of timeline for getting back to you. I'm sure that was in your presentation, but when would you like to hear from us by?
You know, I mean, I think we're, you know, ideally sort of targeting, you know, end of May, beginning of June. You know, but if this group, you know, requires longer, I mean, you know, ideally we're trying to target a decision in this fall. You know, but I think the quicker that we can get the information and the quicker that we, you know, we can do any additional follow-up that's required. You know, I think what I heard in the last, you know, 5 minutes here was, you know, kind of the framework of a response, which I think
Yeah.
is great. So I think we're a long ways there.
Yeah, no, I think you can hear we're pretty passionate about forests, the forestry, and making sure that we strive a balance and go forward and continue having jobs, but make sure there's fiber there for the future too.
Great.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.
Okay. Moving on to CAO report 6.1 building amendment bylaw. You don't have to stay. I know we're not the most interesting yet. Anybody have any questions on this? Does somebody want to make a motion? Seconder? Councillor Vandola, all in favor? Carried. So that was moving the recommendation. 6.2, prior approval for council members policy. Somebody want to move the recommendation? Seconder?
Second.
Any questions or comments? All in favor? Carried. 6.3, video surveillance policy. Seconder? Any questions or comments? All in favor? Carried. 6.4, UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. Somebody want to move the motion? Councillor Bolmer, Councillor Vandola. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Carried. Okay, 6.5, active transportation plan. Move the recommendation. Councillor Bolmer, seconder. Councillor Frankel, any questions or comments? Carried. 6.6, growing communities reserve fund bylaw. Somebody want to move the recommendation? Seconder. Councillor Martins.
This is the new.
This is the new money, so we have to set up a reserve to contain it so we can show where it goes, right? Is questions or comments? All in favor? Carried. Man, you guys want to get home for supper tonight. No, it's good. It's good. This is all good. Moving on to councillor items. Let's start with Councillor Martins. Councillor Bolmer?
Just one small thing. I went to the chamber meeting with Dr. Gregory Thomas, I believe. And he was very interesting. He is the BC Chamber Chair, and they are trying to get back to what they used to be. They've kind of dropped off, and chambers have dropped off along with them. He was a very interesting speaker. There was myself and also Kevin Wallace, and Leslie Chason was there as well, and Vince and a bunch of the chamber people. And there are 100 chambers as members right now. They're looking for more. And he is going around and trying to reinvigorate the smaller chambers to get involved with the BC Chamber as they start to grow again. And they're trying, we talked about economic drift, how it's, well, yeah, our chambers fought economic drift from here to Prince George for years. Well, now I'd rather see it go to Prince George than where it is going online now. So they've changed that. So he was very interesting. He spent a couple of hours with us, and there was a lot of talk about reinvigorating. Their big meeting is coming up on, now they'll be having an AGM in Prince George on May the 31st. There's one regional director from Prince George. The AGM won't be there, but we have one regional director. They look after this area as well. And they'll all be meeting on May 31st. So, and they're working on creating more visibility for chambers as well, because a lot of people think they've just disappeared. So.
Nothing for me right now.
Just one thing, went to the, oh, sorry. Well, you're waving, so, okay. I forgot to turn it on. There we go. Went to Vancouver and attended the housing forum, the UBCM housing forum. Very, very interesting 2 days. There's a lot happening all at once, and a lot of folks are doing similar things in terms of what we're doing and trying prioritizing and really looking at all the different options. But I think one thing that I think both Councillor Lozzie and I probably agree upon, and maybe she can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we do have to find a way as council and with our housing committee to really focus in on a few key concepts or areas in which to move ahead on. And we have to really, in my opinion, and then you can correct me again, we have to finalize those focuses fairly soon. With the announcements of money and other things coming from the feds, from the province, et cetera, it's really incumbent upon us to get everything organized to the best of our abilities and to move forward in those areas. And there's just so many different needs in all of our communities that, the sound of the money that's being released sounds like a lot, but it's not. So especially when you take in consideration the amount of infrastructure and other pieces that so many of our communities are in dire need of. So there's a lot that we need to make some quick decisions on. And I think in the next couple of months, we need to have them finalized and plans in place. That's my rant a little bit. So it's only a small time of what Mr. Frankel took, but in terms of, I think there's just so much that we're facing there. And I think we've recently come across some really good ideas. And I think this helped echo, I think for both of us being there, that we are on the right path, and there's some opportunities I think we need to follow up with them. Councillor Lozzie, what do you think on?
Yeah, no, I think. Yeah, and it was really timely because the summit was April 4th and 5th, and April 3rd, the government announced their housing action plan. So that was a hot topic while we were down there, and certainly many of the actions that were cited in the plan were reflected in the topics for the housing summit. So a lot of the, construction delays, that was a pretty, because of permitting and approval times, they're inconsistent and not delivered in a timely manner. And they kept saying time is money, and time is money. So how can you forecast what a project will cost when you don't know how long it's going to take to get the permits in place? It's not our issue, but it's certainly an issue in some of the other communities. So larger communities. Densification again was something, and upzoning. And it'll be really interesting to see how the government rolls out the legislation that they're going to bring forward to make R1 zoning basically. They're going to anyway have some thoughts about how R1 zoning should be implemented in communities. And they want, again, that densification where most lots, a single family lot, what we would consider R1, now 2, 3, 4 doors. So that'll be really interesting. Some of these sessions that were discussed were Indigenous Housing Partnership, labor shortages, homelessness, and there was a session on rural and northern housing, which was really good. And we'll be getting you a report. And it was just a lot to process. And again, what was reiterated through across the province, through everybody's real challenge, was infrastructure. aging infrastructure. So there's a lot of, yeah, it's a hot topic as well.
And just to add to that was, I think we have to be careful too, because there's so much that doesn't apply to our
Mhm.
situation, but there are some
Yeah.
that does. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important for us to zone in
Yeah.
on the areas that really do apply to
Yeah.
us. And then as we move forward, then spread out into the others, because if we spend so much time wading through these multi-levels now of different proposal ideas,
Yeah.
we're gonna get lost in the storm, I think.
Lots.
So, thanks, guys. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay. If you want, I can start with my forestry stuff. I'm sorry if that comes off as rant. But I call it passion because I don't feel the provincial government is listening to local government. I mean, they listen, but they're not acting. And I thank Kevin for taking some holidays, because it enabled me to go to the Regional District Business Forum, which I've been to a couple before. And I was, they give the usual updates. This was different. I thought it was really, really well done. I came home enthused, invigorated about what people are trying to do in towns that are hard hit, like Houston. Brand new businesses starting up in Houston and Burns Lake. And they're being hard hit in the forestry sector. And it gave me, not hope, but that's going to happen here. When we transition, that's going to happen here. And I just saw that, and the vitality in the people and the enthusiasm of the people. I just thought it was a really good session, Kevin. So I thought that was really good. The Nechako Watershed Roundtable, we've had 2 quick meetings moving forward. We're trying to elevate this up. The Watershed Security Fund or Strategy Fund should be ready by the end of this year. We need to make sure that Nechako is very prominent within government right now. Probably Cowichan is most prominent. So we're working behind the scenes on trying to make sure that that's elevated, because there's been a lot of good work locally and we just need to make sure that that gets, and I won't go over the Minister of Forest meeting stuff, but the issue is there's lots coming down the pipe, as you heard earlier. And we are struggling trying to absorb it all. And I'm not speaking for any other community, but we are struggling to get up to speed. And then Mark and Lara just asked me to be at a vet meeting this morning at 8:30. And we got 40 spots, so that was good. So that group, not me, that group is going to work on a short, medium, and long-term strategy for the vet cycle. So the 40 seats is awesome. Retiring every year, is 100, so they're short. But so they need more of that stuff. So that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you all. And nothing was meant by rant there. That was all good. And thank you for attending the business forum. That was great. It was nice to take 5 days away. Phone hardly rang, and so it was a much needed refresher. Paid for it this week. It's been a pretty busy week, dealing with some Coastal GasLink stuff, and I think that's been a tough one, and seeing how we keep that relationship on a positive note going forward. We had a good meeting today where they talked about ceasing and desisting on that activity that they were doing. Next few days, of course, is Kofi. So I'm signed up there. Hope to get a chance to talk to, I know Minister Cullen's going to be there. Mr. Rawson, I assume, is going to be there. Premier is going to be there on Friday. So another chance to network, as well as with the obviously the Canfors and Sinclairs of the world. So that's my report going forward. Somebody would like to move that? Do we do that anymore? No, we don't. I know. Old ways. Old habits die hard. Okay. Moving on then for information items. Now, I don't know how everybody else, are they connected to the internet? Or is that why the camera's still on? Councillor Balmer, maybe. You look good. But I can't load the RCMP report because I have no internet. Is anybody else getting it? You've got it? That's what my computer's telling me. I know. You know what? I have fully read it, so I'm good if we wanna, does anybody have any questions, concerns coming out of it? It looks some very positive numbers to me, right? Yeah. You bet. Okay, moving on to not so positive 8.2, building permit reports. Same as last time, yeah.
Can we working on some?
Yeah.
In progress.
Yeah. But maybe worth adding on to that building permit report that it is so exciting. We're gonna have a new building inspector level 3 starting on May 1st. So that's gonna be a great addition to the team. Council priorities is on there for information. We didn't have any correspondence, I don't think. No. So I will declare adjournment. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Well, I actually know. It started with Dave because we were going over in a circle. So it was, did it? Well, let's see.